Adhya Shokat. I welcome to all of you in the first episode of the webinar for the month of March. This episode is about becoming a social science researcher. Dear audience, I hope you will respect the protocols of the webinar. Please use the chat box for your questions and the comments. This webinar is being recorded and presented through live stream that you can find through the sources of social media of University of Education. Dear audience, I'm delighted to introduce you with Dr. Irfan Ahmed Rind. Dr. Rind is pioneering member of the Department of Education, Sakhar IBA University, and worked as the first HOD for 7 years. Currently, he is working as an associate professor. Dr. Rind gold medal in bachelor's and master's in English literature from the University of Sindh and worked as a research associate in the same university for 2 years. In 2007, Dr. Rind got HEC Masters leading to PhD fellowship and joined the University of Sussex, UK, where he got a Master's in Applied Linguistics in 2008 and a PhD in Education in 2012. He worked as a research assistant in the UNESCO UNICEF-sponsored project, the Post-2015 Agenda on Millennium Development Goals, for 6 months before returning to Pakistan. He secured the first postdoctorate from Harvard University in 2016 and second postdoc from Columbia University in 2020. Thank you so much, Dr. Irfan, for being here with us. And let's begin your session formally, and over to you. Thank you. Dr. Irfan, are you there? In English literature from the University of Sindh and worked as a research associate in the same university for 2 years.
Which is quite close to my heart. In fact, I have lived that topic. So when I'll be talking about it, I think I'll definitely be sharing so many personal experiences. Before even I start, to be a researcher, it's one of the most challenging tasks. And as you have already introduced that I have been a very good student, which means that I have been, I performed very well. I got medals in my bachelor and master's. I did my second master's in applied linguistics. I did well there as well. But during my PhD, I found myself in a dilemma where I literally got tears in my eyes. The PhD, or becoming a researcher, was something new for me. I never realized that I could ever have this emotional breakdown while doing my PhD. And why that emotional breakdown was there, why I felt so uncomfortable with this entire process, it's mainly because becoming a researcher is literally to challenge your basic core, the basic belief systems, the basic foundation on which you stand. So during that phase, when I was struggling a lot, especially during my emotional breakdowns, I started reflecting a lot, and I put those reflections into a paper, into a research journey, which I'll be sharing some bits here. Although because of the time, I'll be very specific on some of the things, but my paper on this particular thing is in the production phase. So I'm sure that I will share the entire paper with the audience soon. So let me first try. Post-COVID has taught us a lot to use technology. So I'm trying to share the screen. If you, Sadia, allow me to share my screen, please.
Yes, please.
I think I can't have any option. I don't have the option to share my screen. If you can kindly allow me, I think the access is with you, I guess. I, as a participant, cannot have the right to share the screen.
Asim, can you?
Let me do it. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Brilliant. All right. So we'll talk about it first, and then, of course, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to just let people ask any questions they want to ask. So the topic is this: becoming a social science researcher. So the first and most important question comes in our mind, that why do we conduct research, right? And the answer is of a variety of ways. So the word research um, reflects, in fact, like that's a very naive way of saying it, but when we used to talk to our supervisor and we asked him that why research, uh, he in a very lighter note used to point out the very word search, and then emphasize on the prefix, that is re. So he used to say to us that you are trying to research about the things which have already been found. So which means there are things which you already know, but now you are trying to understand it, you are trying to explore it in a more philosophical way, in a more systematic way. In other words, the things which look very simple to us, we need to problematize them to understand the nature and the complexity of it. So from an ordinary person, the things which might look very simple and they think that they know the answers, a PhD student or an MPhil student is going to problematize that the same simple issue, and then try to understand it in a more in-depth way, in a more philosophical way. Therefore, once when we complete our thesis, we are given the titles of Masters of Philosophy in Education or in Chemistry or in Biology, whatever, and the Doctor of Philosophy, again in our degree. So which means that a researcher deals with the same issue which otherwise are known, but then they problematize it, go deep into it, and understand those issues from a more philosophical point of view. So how do we choose topic? Because this is one of the most important things to be a researcher. Most of the time we choose our research topic based on our personal experiences. We have lived a context, we have experienced something, and then to some extent we kind of realize that this is the area where I can work. Sometimes we read an article, maybe one or two articles, and then we come up with the topic and we decide that yeah, that's the area where I want to work. Supervisor's expertise is the key. Sometimes what happens that it is our supervisor who decides what you are going to do for your PhD or MPhil, and then sometimes we are highly driven by the funding organizations. So funding organizations who fund our thesis or PhD or masters or MPhil or whatever, they actually tell us what exactly research area you're going to work. But one of the most interesting part is that these four things which I have just mentioned to you, the first part, that first personal experience, whoever I have talked up to now, I have been talking to so many MPhil and PhD students, and this research which I'm just mentioning right now is based on empirical work. So majority of the people have selected, especially in social sciences, their topic based on their personal experiences. In fact, once when they selected the topic, it is not only they selected the topic, but to be very honest, they already knew the answers as well. Most of them, when they selected a topic, they have this illusion that they know all the dimensions of this particular topic. They are just here in a program, either in MPhil or PhD program, just to fulfill some formalities. But if they are given chance, they are going to write down all the findings without even talking to the participants. This is basically based on the assumptions which we already built as a researcher. We believe that we already know a lot of things. So, for example, let me give you some of the research topics here. Right now, these are two research topics. The first one is analyzing students' learning experience in the ESL program. Now, this particular topic was based on my own. This is the topic of my PhD thesis. And why I selected this topic for my PhD, because as I experienced this ESL program as a student, and I taught as a teacher in that ESL program. In other words, I knew how students feel and how teachers experiences. So which means I knew almost everything about that topic. Therefore, I selected that topic. If you happen to look at the another topic, this was a very interesting topic. One of our BEd student, undergraduate student, has selected that topic. Examining the influence of mobile phone on the reading and writing of it's illiterate laborers. So there's a mistake here. It's illiterate labor. This student, he lived in a family where his relatives who were so illiterate, they never been to school, but they join labor force, which includes being peon somewhere, being a guard, and then they started observing them that these people, they have never been to school, but they are now reading text messages, and they are also writing text messages. Based on his own observation, this student decided that I want to understand that how the use of mobile phone influence the reading skills and writing skills of these labor class, illiterate labor class, illiterate in a sense that they have never been to school at all. But when I asked him what would be the possible findings, before even conducting research, he already told me what would be the possible findings, right? Likewise, we decide what would be our research questions, right? We make our research questions exactly in the same way, and we make our research question in a way that that's how we do it initially, that we already know about everything. But when we look at those two questions, if we happen to look at these two questions which I've just put forward here, so the topic is same, but the research questions, I hope that when you are going to have a time, you can see those PPTs later on. If you happen to see the language of these two research questions, a person who is not well informed about the methodology or research design may hardly find out any difference between these two questions. And that's what happened to me as well, and that's what happened to that student I'm talking about. Both of these questions, just because of certain words, required a different nature of study. So the questions in red requires a researcher to be descriptive in nature. A researcher just needs to explore or describe the problem. A researcher do not have to disrupt the system. A researcher can talk to the participants, observe the scenario, and then systematically mention all the findings. However, in the second question, the questions in black require researcher to disrupt the system, to bring some change in the system. Therefore, the kind of research they are going to do would most probably be experimental in nature. Either it's going to be, quasi-experiment, or it's going to be action research. But initially, we selected the topic based on our personal experiences. But when it comes to making research questions, we were not aware of where our research is going to end up. What would be our research design? Because we know we thought that we know everything, but we did not know how to conduct that research, at least for our supervisors. So what exactly happened that when we have such kind of a problem, the first thing which we decide is that what could be our, and that's what happens. That's how you become a researcher. Before even you go to deep questions, which I'm going to raise later on, you go on a very shallow level of questions. So the very shallow level of questions is that I know what's the topic, but now I want to make a research question, but I'm not sure that my research questions are going to lead me where. So I need to know what would be my research design, right? So now, before I go and talk about some of the more philosophical questions, I am starting with a very shallow questions. That is, what would be my research design? Now, when we talk about research design, in order to select what could be your research design, by the way, research design is considered to be the blueprint of your research. It's like a map. It's a complete map which is going to inform you what your research would look like. Somebody asked me, how do you compare research design with anything else? I say research design is like those maps for building, which actually tells you what would be the building look like. So say, for example, if you want to make a hospital, the hospital must have certain common characteristics. Yeah, their appearances might be different, but they must have some common characteristics. So when you are going to make a map of a hospital, the building must have some common characteristics. However, other things might be changed. Maybe its facade might be changed, maybe its color, or some of the bits might be changed, but the basic structure of a hospital remains same. Likewise, if you are making a map for a school, you need to keep some basic characteristics. So likewise, in a research, when you are going to conduct a research, there might be some changes, but your basic structure for a unique research will be, for a particular research will be same. So let me give you an example of that. So when you are deciding your research design, the first level is either your research is going to be descriptive or experimental. I've already mentioned that descriptive research are those research where you do not have to disrupt the system. You are going to go into the field, you may talk to the participants, you may observe the context, you can put those findings without bringing any change in the system. The system will remain same. Whereas in experimental studies, you need to go and bring some change in the system. That means you are going to, if you happen to, so let me give you an example of that. Let me go you back in these two questions. Look at this first question. How do students' learning approaches are influenced by the teaching learning environment of English language program? In order to answer that, you just need to go and talk to maybe students, maybe teachers, maybe principal or head of the department. You might even go and observe the classes, right? And then you come back and then you can put all your findings in a report form, and that is called a descriptive study. But if you look at the nature of the second question, how can the teaching and learning environment of an English language program be enhanced to improve students' learning approaches? In order to conduct this study very effectively, you don't have to only talk to the participants. Okay, you may go and ask participants that, like, how we can improve it. Here, to justify this research question, you need to introduce some sort of intervention in the system. You need to bring some sort of change, right, into the teaching learning environment and see the effects of it. That either your intervention has brought some significant change in the students' learning approaches. Therefore, when we talk about our research questions, we have to decide either our research study is going to be descriptive or experimental. Now, within descriptive, we have another kind of we have to further decide either it's going to be exploratory research or it's going to be theoretical research, right? And in experimental, we'll talk about either it's going to be action research or it's going to be quasi-experiment. I'm going to talk about quasi-experiment, but I'm sure there's a vast audience out there and they might be aware of action research. But just to remind you what would be the common structure of action research. So action research starts by identifying a problem, developing an intervention, implementing an intervention, right? Collecting data on that intervention, analyzing the data, whether your intervention worked or not, right? You can propose a theory that, my intervention worked, or you may actually, if you feel that no, it didn't work well, you may go back and you may identify what happened with your intervention. You may actually once again identify the problem, revisit your intervention, collect the data again, analyze. Most of the educational activities which have been introduced in our schools today are the result of this action research. The people religiously identify the problem, right, or maybe envision a success. They develop interventions, like implement it, collect data on it, analyze the data, and then if it is perfect, they come up with a conclusion, a syllabus is made, a research methodology is introduced, pedagogy is introduced. If not, if that intervention, if that the new thing is not perfected, they go back and they try to find out, okay, what was the problem in their original plan, and then they revise the plan once again, implement it, collect the data, and so forth and so on. That's how the action research looks like. When we talk about the quasi-experimental, I'm going to be very naive about here, but quasi-experiment, if you want to compare, say for example, an intervention with the existing practices, quasi-experimental is wonderful. For example, you wanted to introduce inquiry-based teaching in a research method class, whereas a teacher is using traditional lecture method to teach the same course. Now, most of your colleagues believe that the traditional method is effective in teaching a research method, but you wanted to prove that inquiry-based method is more effective, and in order to more effective than the traditional method. So in order to do that, you are going to find out a similar group, maybe a class of 50 students with the same aptitude, same attitude, right? You are going to divide them into two groups. The first group is called control group. You are going to teach them research methods with the traditional method. So they are going to be taught research method as it is, and you are going to teach the second half, which we call experimental group, using pure intervention. And then you are going to compare the pre-test from the whole group on the exact research, like the things which you are focusing here. Here the focus is on research methods. So you conduct a pre-test on their skills about the research methods, and then you are going to conduct the post-test, and then you are going to compare, and then you are going to come a conclusion, either your experiment or your intervention is effective than the traditional method. That's how the quasi-experimental experiments are actually used. Once when you decide that either your study is descriptive or experimental, your second decision about research design is either you are going to conduct your study, or you are going to collect the data from your participants in one point of time. So see, I'm using a phrase which is very important, one point of time. Or you are going to collect the data in multiple point of time. And in order to understand that, I'm going to give you one common example. So we offer B.Ed program, and somebody wants to conduct a study to understand the impact of B.Ed program on a student's learning. Now, because the focus of entire B.Ed program, they have to select research design. The first research design is that they are going to select first year students in 2020. These are the 30 students. They are going to collect data from these 30 students when they join the program in the first year, and then they are going to collect the data in the second year, and then they collect the data from the same participant in the third year, then in the fourth year. So what exactly happened that the researcher has selected one group of students from first year and collected the data from the same participants in the multiple point of time. Such studies are called as longitudinal or longitudinal. The pronunciation can vary. However, such designs require time and funding, which most of the students do not have. Therefore, they go for cross-sectional or snapshot research design. So here what they do, that they have wanted to cover the experiences of all the students who have been studying in B.Ed program. So what they are going to do, they are going to select the sample. They are going to select some students from first year, some from second year, some from third year, some from fourth year, and they are going to collect the data from all these participants in one point of time. One point of time can be 1 month, 1.5 months, 2 months. During that period, they can conduct interviews or data from the same participants multiple times. However, They have collected the data in one point of time, one specific time period. Such kind of a study is called as cross-sectional. So we need to be sure, okay, what is our studies, longitudinal or cross-sectional, and we make this decision based on our time and funding. The last part of research design is the sampling. We need to see what is our research design, what is our research question, and based on our research question, we decide that either we are going to cover all the population, the whole population, or at least a large chunk of population. If that's what we are trying to cover, then we have to conduct a survey, because then conducting interviews would be impossible. It's not practical at all. Or we are going to understand a phenomena from very few representatives. If we are selecting a very few representatives of an entire population, which we call sample, then our research design might be case study, right? It might be case study. So if you happen to see that when I, as a student, selected this topic, this question, I was not aware of all these steps. So my initial efforts were to put all my energy on deciding what would be my research design. However, when I reached to that point, I thought that I'm well informed. I thought that yes, I've done my job, I become a researcher. But then comes the more challenging part. And that challenging part was to go through a process which required me to be a philosopher, which required me to move from an ordinary person to a more philosopher, or to see the things more philosophically. So this whole thing, from an ordinary student to a philosopher, this whole thing took place in 3 stages. So the first stage, I call it construction phase. Second stage, I call it deconstruction phase. And the last is called reconstruction. So let's talk about construction phase. So see, remember, I think most of you are here. The construction phase is a phase where we, as a researchers or as an individual, believe that we already know everything. In fact, we have already constructed the fixed answers or fixed methods in our mind. In other words, we already constructed a unique way of seeing things. And why we have done that? Based on our previous knowledge. Since we already know a lot about certain things, especially our research topic, we know that we believe that we know everything. Our previous educational degrees, for example, when I got admission in PhD, I was pumped up. I said that I got 2 gold medals, I got 2 masters, I have a huge experience, right, teaching experience and all that stuff. So I thought that my previous education and my previous experiences are too good, right? In fact, the very eligibility to join the MPhil or PhD program make me believe that I know everything. I am eligible, that's why I'm here. Now this phase is called, this phase is full of ego, this phase is full of, the overconfidence that we know everything. But then comes the deconstruction phase. That's where a good supervisor, a good, wonderful supervisor plays the role. What this supervisor does, that the supervisor starts challenging our pre-assumptions. We already assume that we know everything, and this supervisor, or we call them critical friends, they challenge what we already knew, right? And how do they challenge it? They challenge these things by telling us, okay, what are you doing here? And of course, our common answer is, sir, I am here, I'm conducting research to know the reality of my participants. And then he asks, what is your contribution? So I say, my contribution is that I'm adding new knowledge. And then he smiles and look at me, say, okay, so you are dealing with the knowledge and the reality of your participants. I say, yes. Then he says, what do you mean by knowledge? Since you are dealing with the concept of knowledge, what do you mean by knowledge? What do you mean by reality? Before you even start exploring the reality of your participants, you need to ask yourself, what do you mean by reality? Then, as a social science researchers, we are dealing with individuals, and these individuals are, interacting with different social structures. We call them society, institutions, right? A common word is used as called structures. So if we are social scientists, if we are dealing with the individuals and society, then supervisor asks, how do you define the relationship between this individual and society? The most common phrases are agent and structure. How do you define the nature of it? Again, no clue, not at all, because I thought that I knew everything, but here, everything was gone. It is only then he says, now, once when you answer the first two things, then you can give me the answer that why you chose certain methodology. You need to link your methodology with these two first questions. Why qualitative, why quantitative, why mixed method? You just can't simply say that I like it, or, you need to link with these two first questions. And then you are going to come and tell me why your research design is that. So see, at construction phase, I started with the research design, but I did not realize that these big questions are awaiting me. So when they asked me these questions, this was so difficult, because now I was being asked to talk about something which I never thought about myself. So what exactly happens? What exactly happens? So the first question, that is the first thing, is reflection on nature of knowledge and reality. If we look at that question, so I'm going to, in next slide, I'll be talking about the nature of knowledge and reality. So this is how it stands. So the questions which are related to the nature of knowledge and reality, the common phrase in research for that is called philosophical stance, right? So, and what are those philosophical stance? Philosophical stance actually are related to your two stance, which you have to be clear about. The first is called as ontological stance. Ontology is the branch of philosophy which deals with what knowledge is. So as I already said, my supervisor asked me, since you are trying to understand new knowledge, new reality of your participants, you need to tell me, in fact you are going to tell yourself what knowledge is for you. And the second is epistemological stance, and that is how knowledge is acquired. So ontology deals with what knowledge is, and epistemology deals with how this knowledge can be acquired. These two questions were very, very important for me. In order to answer these questions, I found that the questions of ontology is at these two spectrums. These are spectrums. So we have two extreme positions here. At the first position, at the first extreme position, we have the people who are called as positivists. In other words, these people believe on the objectivity. If you are going to ask them, if you ask these positivists what knowledge is, they are going to say, and I'm going to say it very slowly so that you can understand. They say that knowledge exists independent of human perception. Knowledge exists independent of human perception. It is based on facts and figures which are systematically discovered by experts. An ordinary person do not have the ability to discover that knowledge. I repeat, positivists are those who believe that knowledge exists independent of human perception. It does not make any difference how you see certain things. Things will remain same. Facts will remain same. And these facts are mutually decided by experts, the people who we call, well-known people, wise people, or the people who are scientific, who have degrees and who have qualifications and experiences. With their experiments, they find out, they decide what is fact and what is not. In fact, they are the people who decide what is reality. And therefore, the reality is fixed. Therefore, whatever they have discovered, that is fixed. So positivists believe on the fixity of knowledge. They believe that knowledge is fixed, knowledge is, is objective. The second group, which falls at the other extreme, they are entirely opposite of positivists. They are called constructivists. If you are asking these people what is knowledge for them, they would say knowledge is the production of human mind. Knowledge depends on human perception. Individuals interact with their surroundings to construct new knowledge. These are two opposite people. They believe on subjectivity. They believe on variability of knowledge. What is right for me might not be right for you. And then there's a third group which comes in the middle. We call them pragmatists. They are doubtful at both of them. They are, well, in a very naive way, we call them confused people. Well, not confused, they have the doubt. They always doubt. They sometimes do not want to get into the debate of objectivity versus subjectivity. They are more focused on, finding out the solution. And therefore, sometimes they go on the positive aspect, sometimes they become objective, and sometimes they become subjective. Now, if you happen to see that this philosophical stance, either you are positivist, constructivist, or pragmatist, informs your methodology. So when we say that I'm qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method researcher, you just can't say it without any philosophical positioning. Your philosophical positioning actually informs what your research methodology is. So say, for example, if you are a positivist who believe that knowledge is fixed, knowledge has been discovered by expert, you most probably use quantitative method. Why quantitative? Because quantitative methods usually are based on hypothesis. Usually you have null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. These hypotheses are made based on the previously found studies, right, or previously intellectual guesses by experts. You make hypothesis and your whole focus is to prove or disprove it. So what you do, you go for quantitative study, collect data from a large population, and your focus is entirely to prove or disprove certain hypotheses. So for you, the knowledge is fixed, it is based on objectivity, and it can be discovered by using mathematics and empirical study without adding any emotions and feelings. And once when you prove your hypothesis, you tend to generalize it. So positivists tend to generalize their findings, and therefore they use quantitative research method. Constructivists, on the other hand, believe that knowledge is the production of human mind. Individuals interact with their surroundings, and therefore they construct their own reality, own knowledge, right? So therefore they go for the qualitative method. A qualitative method is used for those topics which are complex, which requires an in-depth understanding. Qualitative research methods is used when we want to give voice to our audience. And here, constructivists believe that if you really want to understand the reality of your participants, you should give them voice. You should understand their reality from their point of view, and that's how you can do it. A constructivist do not have hypotheses. They might have critical assumptions. However, they are very flexible, they are very fixed. They always give voice to their participants, and therefore qualitative methods really matches with them. The person who is more pragmatist, as I already said, is more focused on finding out the problem. Therefore, they can go for either one of those methods, or they can mix or match. That's how mixed method approach. So if somebody asks you what is your philosophical positioning when it comes to when you are using mixed method, you would say I'm a pragmatist and therefore I'm using mixed method approach. But once when you answer your research, once when you have answered that what is your why you have using, so once when you have just clarified your ontological and epistemological stance, and which is going to inform your methodology, either you are going to be qualitative, quantitative, or mixed method, the next question is what is your social stance? So what is social stance? So social stance deals with the conceptualization between the conceptualization of the relationship between the agent, here I'm talking about individual, and the structure, means society. So as a social science researchers, we need to be clarified, okay, what is the relationship between individual and agent. Once again, here we have another spectrum. There are so many stands here, but I have talked about two most common ones. So at one stance, there's a group called individualist, and the other stand or other extreme, we have the people who are called as post-structuralism. We'll talk about it both right now. So in my next slide, I'm going to talk about the social stance, and your social stance really help you to define how you are going to analyze your data. So philosophical stance inform your methodology, and social stance informs your data analysis strategy. So let's see how. So if we happen to look at the social stance, although there are so many, and I think you might have heard a lot. You might have heard about feminism, modernism, postmodernism. Here I have just talked about some of the three most basic social stance which are used. The first one is individualism. Individualist people are those who believe that individuals operate independent of structure. In fact, they believe that I as a human being do not have any influence of the society at all. They are the people who believe that if you really want to understand the social issues, you need to understand the cognitive aspects of your participants. For example, if you want to understand, and here I want to give you a wonderful example of, for example, you have a student called Fatma, and Fatma is not participating in your class, and that's your research question. So you are trying to understand why girls like Fatma do not participate in the classrooms, and that is a research topic for a social science researcher. If you are an individualist, your focus would mostly be on different effect factors of Fatma. You are going to focus on the concepts like motivation, fear, anxiety. You will be talking about how to reduce the fear, anxiety of Fatma, how to give her opportunity to participate in the class. Teacher should, and then you will be end up recommending that teacher should encourage Fatma, clap, make her clap, make people clap for her, give her opportunity to come in front of the dais, talk, and so forth and so on. You won't even link Fatma's issues with the bigger structure where she comes from. However, if the same topic is studied by a structuralist who believes that individuals are highly influenced by the structure, in fact, structuralists believe that individuals are the puppet of structures. An individual do not have any choice. They do not make any of their own choice. All their choices and actions are influenced by the society structure. So if the same topic has been studied by the structuralist, and the topic was to understand why girls like Fatma do not participate in the class, the structuralist would not start from the motivation. The structuralist will start from the overall structure. He will talk or she will talk about the overall society. So they will talk about that how the women in general are suppressed in this patriarchal society. They will further narrow it down to, for example, Pakistan, which is more patriarchal. They will further emphasize that within the Pakistani structure, the metropolitan city have less patriarchy, and then villages might have more patriarchy. And there they can link that Fatma, the girls like Fatma who come from the villages may come into the universities, but then they bring those underpowering attitude with them. When they come and sit in these classes, they lose their motivation, not because they are demotivated or they have a fear. They have not been empowered by the structure of the classroom, where the man is more empowered. They have got more opportunity to talk and more participation. So what an structuralist does, They are going to maybe understand the same motivation and fear of the Fatma, but from a more structuralist point of view. They are going to talk about how women are operated in the society and how society suppresses them, and that is reflected in her lack of motivation and participation in the class. The third group is called post-structuralist. The post-structuralists believe that, yes, they acknowledge the fact that structures are very powerful. They are very, very powerful. However, an individual also use their agency. In other words, they believe, so if we happen to see a structuralist, and the structuralist would say that the son of a king might end up being a king. A son of a prime minister or a politician may end up being a politician. A son of a beggar may end up being a beggar. Right? But when you are going to ask them, okay, what about some of those people who never meant to be elite? They belong to a very poor family, but somehow they managed to be elite. For example, a son of a cobbler become a CSS officer, and now that person is a very super elite. So the structuralist cannot define those cases. These are exceptional cases. Such cases are explained by post-structuralists who believe that, yes, the son of a beggar or cobbler was faced with so many structural forces. He was being forced by his parents, his society, overall group to be cobbler, but this guy has used his agency, his power, his willpower, and then he has navigated through the system and then, changed his social class. A post-structuralist always highlight those issues, always explain those cases where structuralists fail to explain. In fact, post-structuralists talk about the change agents, the people who go against the flow. And therefore, this philosophical stance is also very important. Now, see how this thing really influences you, this whole thing. Either individualist, structuralist, or post-structuralist. If you have the same topic, right, and there are three people with the three different social stands, they end up having entirely different findings. And all these findings are legitimate, by the way. Why? Because each individual has taken a different social stance to define the most complex phenomena that is called human beings. Hello? Alright. So your social stance informs your data analysis strategy. Either you are going to be inductive, means you are going to generate a theory, or you are going to be deductive, which means you are using a theory. So say, for example, if you want to use a deductive approach, which means you have the data, but you want to use a theory which can help you to analyze the data. You cannot select a random theory. Your theory will come from one of these school of thought. Some people use Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy comes from individualist perspective, right? If you happen to see Bloom's taxonomy, you do not find any hint of structure, society, nothing at all. They are only talking about what's happening in your mind, emotions, psychomotor factors, and so forth. When we look at the structuralism, here you have the theory of Bourdieu's theory of structuralism. So Bourdieu keeps talking about the concept of capital, cultural capital, symbolic capitals. These things are super structuralist. If you happen to come post-structuralism, for example, there is a theory called community of practices. I mean, some of you might know that. Community of practices or another activity, there's another theory called activity theory. I mean, I won't be talking about it a lot here, but these theories come from this school of thought. So you can't simply select a theory, randomly theory, without knowing where this theory comes from. If you are selecting one theory, you are promoting one school of thought. And that theory is going to inform the way you are going to analyze your data. Likewise, if you are not using a theory, but you are letting your data generate theory, we call it, inductive approach. In that scenario, even if you are generating a theory, your data is, generating a theory, still you have to take one of those stands. You cannot simply do that being uninformed. I mean, this is what happens with the Pakistani students. Most of the Pakistani students, especially in the social sciences, either students or teachers, they fail to publish in impact factor publication journals, mainly because they are not well informed about their social stance. If you happen to go out and look at the research journals in education, each research journal, represents a school of thought. Most of the time they reject your paper not because your paper is of lack of quality or does not have any quality. Your paper do not fit into their paradigm. So these journals actually select those research papers which fit into their paradigm. Unfortunately, most of us, especially students from Pakistan, are not even aware of these things, and therefore we fail to publish such papers. But once when you are well informed about all these things, once when you are well informed about your philosophical positioning and your social stance, then comes the third stage. Now this stage is awesome. That's called reconstruction. Now, whatever conclusions which you are going to make, whatever decisions which you are going to make, everything will be aligned. So let's start from the philosophical stance. So your philosophical stand, for example, if you have a philosophical stand, you have to decide what is your ontological stand. If you are subjectivist or constructivist, your epistemological stance will be interpretivist. So what is interpretivist? One, an interpretivist is a person who believes that the best way to, so first of all, let's link it with the ontology. So you ask them question, what is knowledge? They say knowledge is the construction of human mind. So how to acquire that knowledge? The best way to acquire that knowledge is to interpret the reality of your participants. In other words, give opportunity to your participants, and then you as a researcher interpret their reality, their words, their thoughts in your own way. But an interpretivist actually have three interpretation. First of all, they interpret what participants says, then they take what literature says, which means they are going to take interpretation from literature as well. They are going to combine literature and their participants, they are going to combine them together. And then finally, being subjectivist, they are going to add their own subjectivity. They are going to bring little bit of their own subjectivity as a researcher and then interpret their own interpretation. So when we are talking about a qualitative researcher, a person who is ontologically constructivist, epistemologically interpretivist, their research methodology is qualitative, that person actually is interpreting three interpretations. What their participant says, what literature says, and then the combination of both, and then what that person as a researcher himself is going to say. So the report writing of a qualitative researcher is the interpretation of his own as well. And you can always assume that there would be the element of subjectivity. How to control that subjectivity is an art actually, and then we'll talk about it later. But if you ontologically, if you are objectivist, yeah, positivist, epistemologically, actually there's no particular word for that. So epistemologically, if you believe that knowledge is fixed, right? It does not. It is fixed. It does not depend on the human perception. The best way to acquire that knowledge is to either confirm it or reject it, and therefore they always make hypotheses, and therefore the best way of proving a hypothesis or disproving a hypothesis is quantitative research method. And the person who is at the middle, pragmatist, they always go for mixed method. Now look at how your qualitative method informs your data collection tool. If you are a qualitative research, you always use interview. Why? Because interview helps you to interpret the reality of your participants. You use participatory observation because again you are trying to triangulate what your participant says and what you have seen. Why you have seen, why your interpretation is important, because as a person who believes that knowledge is the construction of human mind, it also applies you as a researcher. So therefore your observation is also very important. And here again, documentary review. We review document and then we are going to bring our own understanding. Quantitative researchers always use questionnaires or structured observations because these questionnaires and structured observations yield fixed answers. So you do not give them any space. You are going to give them a statement, and you are going to ask your participants to strongly agree or strongly disagree. Either say yes or no. And based on their fixed answers, you are going to convert those answers into numbers, and then you are going to analyze those numbers statistically. Whereas here in that case, you are going to use thematic analysis, because the you have the words, phrases which you are going to convert into themes. So everything is connected. Everything is well informed. There is no cross connection. Everything actually is connected. Only the people in the middle, the mixed method people, researchers, they have the liberty to use both of these. But again, maybe in some other session we are going to talk about that using qualitative or quantitative alone is much easier than using mixed method. The people who tend to use mixed method approach have more responsibility and liability to justify their decisions than qualitative or quantitative alone. So in Pakistan, unfortunately, we believe that mixed method is one of the easiest method, therefore we opt on that. But if you happen to be in a slightly critical environment, you would feel a huge challenge to use mixed method, because it's very difficult to justify mixed method approach. Like look at the data analysis. If you are going to analyze your data, either it's thematic, it comes from qualitative, or statistical, it comes from quantitative. That thing is going to inform by your social stance. So if you are individualist, structuralist, or post-structuralist, all these social stance inform your data analysis. Everything is so connected. And once when you have this well-informed connection, once when you connect your choices and your choices of data collection tools and data analysis strategy, your data, whatever data you're going to collect, it will be well informed. Your data analysis will be well informed. Your data interpretation, the way you are going to interpret it, because you're going to use a theory, a particular social stance, your data interpretation will also be well informed. Your conclusions and recommendations are going to be well informed. And therefore, your contribution in the body of research will be acknowledged. And that's where your papers are published in an impact factor publications. The top ranking journals. The top ranking journals actually publish only those studies which are well informed, which have all these steps carried out. So that was all about from my side. What do you think? So we'll talk about it now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irfan, for conducting a wonderful session with us. Dear audience, we have question answer session now. If you have your question, yeah, it's a comment for you from Anam Qureshi. Dear audience, if you have questions, so please put your question in the chat box. We have question from Maria.
Yep.
And she is asking how research is getting affected in social sciences discipline due to pandemic.
Wow, Maria, well done. So Maria has a very good question, but I think that what I've just talked about, either it's a COVID situation or not situation. To be a social science researcher, first of all, there is a internal dilemma. I think we need to deal with that first of all. I'm going to come to your point, Maria, but before even I come to that, I need to emphasize that to be a quality researcher, you need to bring a revolution in your own mind, right? And that revolution is to reflect on the things which I've just talked about. It took me 1.5 years to comprehend what I have just said. So first and most important thing is that we need to comprehend what I've just said. Now, once when you have understood all these things and you have embedded those things in your
Can you please tune off your mic, please?
खाना साथ देने का अगर प्लान ना हुआ क्या गाड़ी अवेलेबल हो
Okay. So now next about Maria's question. Maria,
जी सारी मैं ना उस्मान से रब्ता करती हूँ। उस्मान अगर आज आ जाते हैं ना फैक्ट्री से 5-6 बजे तक, फिर तो मैं आज चली जाऊंगी, वरना मैं कल चली जाऊंगी। मैं रब्ता करती हूँ।
Dr. Naima, can you please turn off your mic? Dr. Naima? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, please carry on. Sorry for the
interruption. So Maria, first question. So social science is due to pandemic. So let's start with that. So what happened that because of this COVID situation, we end up collecting data using calls. When you conduct a call, right? When you conduct a call, you do not see the facial expressions. Very, very important. My facial expressions talks more than what I say. A social science researcher always go to the facial expressions, the way that the tone. These are very important. Number two, in this current situation, we end up restricting ourselves on what people are saying or participants are saying, but we cannot triangulate it through our participatory observation. A participatory observation is one of the key factors, right, in determining the context. A social science researcher always emphasizes on the context, and unfortunately, in current situation, we could not experience the context. As I said that, as a qualitative researcher, for example, myself, I am going to interpret the reality of my participants from my point of view. Therefore, as a body who is going to interpret the reality of my participants, I need to at least experience some of their context. If not a lot, I should at least go there, see things, maybe, understand a few things, maybe understand the subtlety of the context, and then try to relate it what my participants are saying and how they are saying. So it is very important. So I hope my answer might have satisfied you to some extent. But if we happen to look only on this your question, I think we can talk about like for 4 or 5 hours.
Okay, if you have any question, dear audience, any question? Okay.
Yes, Sadia, can I ask a question?
Please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Irfan. It was really fruitful to have to listen your presentation. I assume that you have done a lot of research in the field of social science and you have been supervising the research students as well. I just wanted to ask you that how do you develop the skill in your students regarding taking the interviews? Because when we talk about the social sciences research and in particular descriptive research, the main research tool is the researcher himself or herself. And I have observed in the Pakistani context that most of our students who are very interested to do the qualitative research, they do not have the right set of skills, especially in terms of listening skills and then the skill of probing. So I have observed that the scholars, they are just PhD scholars or the MPhil scholars, they are just struggling to take a good interview. They used to think that if I have asked the question and the answer has been given in pointers or in one-liner, it should be enough. So for a good interview, to develop a good interview skills among your students, how have you been trained to your students? Can you share your experience?
Thank you, Dr. Naima. So, I myself have been facing the same problem with my MPhil students. But coincidentally, I am not facing the same problem with my B.Ed students. With the B.Ed students, we got an opportunity to be with them for at least 4 years. And I personally teach them in the first semester, the teaching method. I teach them the course called teaching method. And during that course, teaching method, what I do actually, I started my discussion with the debate of objectivity versus subjectivity. And that debate, objectivity versus subjectivity, continues throughout the 4 years, right? And once when this thing is continued, the concept of subjectivity becomes not very clear, but to some extent they are aware of how subjectivity really works. Let's put it in that way. We try to take advantage of the time and bring a change in their epistemic beliefs. So say for example, we bring a change in the way they see knowledge and learning, and that requires time, unfortunately. So we have heard about the skills, like we have heard like the attitudes which are very important. For example, tolerance, the inclusiveness, the concept of nationalism, which is beyond the ethnicity, for example, religious tolerance. Now these attitudes are the result of the basic belief that knowledge is not fixed. There can be multiple right answers. My perspective might not be the only right perspective. Others' perspective can also have the value and worth. When we bring a change in their basic epistemic beliefs, and how we bring that change? We bring that change by introducing these concepts from the first semester onwards. So when you bring a change in their basic belief system, they have the tendency to listen to others. Most of our students, while conducting interviews, they become impatient, mainly because once when they get the answer which matches with their own perception, they stop there. Anything which goes beyond their perspective, anything which does not match their perspective, it is very difficult for them to comprehend. Sometimes they even become personal. Sometimes they started arguing with the interviewee, and instead of collecting the data, instead of giving them the voice, they rather try to impose their own voice. Now this is mainly because we are so firm in our own perspectives that we believe that our perspective is the only right perspective. And once when we believe that, it's very challenging to listen to others. It is very challenging to comprehend that others' perspective might be right as well. So this is something which we need to do. And how to do it in 2 years in MPhil? I don't know, honestly speaking. I am not sure. For the first time, I'm teaching Foundation of Education in our MPhil program. And I have literally redesigned the Foundation of Education in a way where I'm going to bring this debate to my participants. I'm going to ensure that they are going to be aware of this debate, and then let's see how long they are going to be reflective about it. And then, of course, we are going to see the impact of such kind of reflections on their choices, right, on their attitudes. So Dr. Naima, you are focusing, your question is not about the, so your question actually is highlighting the point that the issue is not with the skills, the issue is with the attitude. So we need to work on the attitude, not the skills. The skills, they already know how to talk to somebody and they have been talking. But when it comes to attitude, it's very important. I hope that, I don't know.
Yes, I think you are right that when they listen anything which does not match to their own answers or own assumptions, they do not record it. They only record what they think is in their mind already. And you rightly said it is related to their own epistemology. And that is again one challenge and one criticism of qualitative research too, that if you are not a skillful researcher or you do not have the right disposition to conduct the qualitative research, the trustworthiness of that research would be questionable. And I think you have rightly suggested that teaching them the philosophy, especially the epistemological stance and the foundation of education which you have referred to, would be the useful strategy that how they are going to accumulate the knowledge at the end of the day. Yes, thank you, Dr. Irfan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amna. Well, we have lots of questions, but we are just running short of the time. It's a 1 hour session and 15 minutes for the question answer session. I have a question from you, Dr. Irfan. How do you perceive about the common gaps in the research that become challenging to publish research in the quality journal?
I think, Dr. Sadia, I think I've already highlighted that, but I'm going to repeat it once again. So, as I said that, I think I'm going to just answer that question in a more slightly in a different way. There was a professor, Harvard professor, and his name was William Perry. William Perry has conducted a study. He was an educational psychologist, and he conducted a study on how their undergraduate students develop their basic epistemic beliefs that is related to what knowledge is and how knowledge is acquired. I'm sorry, I'm going to just maybe take it slightly different, and then I'm going to link it with your question. And then he found that the epistemic beliefs that what is knowledge and how knowledge is acquired is developed at 4 stages, and these are hierarchical stages. The first stage is dualist. I'm a dualist because I believe that knowledge is fixed and knowledge comes from authority. That's it. But slowly and gradually, because of the time, exposure, my interactions with the environment, I slowly and gradually develop to the next stage that's called multiplicity. Now I believe that knowledge is variable. There can be more than one answer. And I started seeing that the authority, the people who are authority, teachers, scientists, they are not the only source of knowledge, they are the co-constructors. The third stage is called as relativist. Here, I also believe that knowledge is multiple. Experts are co-constructors. But here I give importance to the context. I believe that context is very important. At relativist stage, I am more pragmatist. I already talk about pragmatism. So I can use this theory, I can use that theory, I can use this ism, that ism. So sometimes I'm feminist, sometimes I'm modernist, sometimes I am structuralist. Whatever comes to me, I look at the context, right? And I use that theory. That's called relativist, right? But I'm well informed, by the way. I know about the theories, I know about the isms, I know how the society works, but I do not take one particular school of thought. The last stage is called as committed relativist. Committed relativists are those who now remain fixed with one paradigm. After experimenting with everything, they will take one school of thought, for example, feminism, and they will remain strict with feminism throughout. You can see the way they talk, everything is reflected from that ism. So in my case, I'm a post-structuralist, very firm post-structuralist, right? All my arguments, all my research from last 2 years actually is reflected post-structuralism, right? The person who is at the committed relativist, these people are called as the advocate or the guardians of a particular paradigm. These committed relativists becomes the editors of a unique journals. These journals always promote one unique paradigm. So I do not have the list right now, else I would have given you a wonderful example. That, for example, there's a journal called Compare, right? It's a journal. It's an impact factor journal. Compare journal. All the editors of these Compare journal are post-structuralist. Stop. Full stop. That's it. They are post-structuralist. If you happen to submit any paper, a very nice, very thorough paper, to their journal, and that your paper is not reflecting the post-structuralism paradigm, they would simply reject it. So the point is that when we reach to that level, which I'm talking committed relativists, it is only then we would understand what are those journals, what paradigm they promote, and then we write accordingly to those journals, and therefore they are going to accept our papers. Now there are two kinds of papers. One paper are those, but there are two kinds of journals. One journals are those which are contributing a lot into the body of research, right? These would not charge you any money from you. highly impact factor journals, highly reputed journals. If you happen to see their list of editors, like very prominent people are there. If your paper fits into their criteria, and the main criteria is the paradigm, which paradigm you come from, they will accept it, and then they will see the rigor and all that stuff. But other kinds of journals, they are paid journals. They can accommodate you. They can accommodate you, either you have a paradigm or no paradigm. They can accommodate you, but they are going to charge you $1,000 or something like that. Such kind of journals are more profit driven. Their contribution to the body of literature is, to some extent, there is, but you cannot associate yourself, if you are publishing there, you cannot associate yourself to one particular group of people. So if I am publishing into a well-informed journal, I end up getting very strong context with them as well, because now we share the common, and that's how I personally got an opportunity to be at Columbia University. My professor, she's the founder in developing the concept of epistemic beliefs. Why? Because she has seen some of my work which is reflecting the same paradigm. So the answer to your question simple is that one of the biggest hurdle for us to publish in a quality journal is because we do not have, either we do not have any social stance or philosophical stance, or we are not vocal about it in our paper, and therefore our paper do not fit into their schema, and therefore no matter how good data collection or data analysis is, but because we do our thoughts do not match with their philosophy, we are not accepted.
Thank you, Dr. Irfan. You justified it very well. I would just like to appreciate the comment of Amana. And yes, Amna, this is really true, and I'm going to conduct another session related to the researchers' assumption and how they contribute in terms of developing the foundation knowledge of the researcher while conducting a research in the future. So thank you so much for your comment. Well, Dr. Irfan, how do you plan your research activities like publishing paper along with your hectic work routine? And how many papers do you publish a year? So, how you are doing lots of activities. You are a very busy person, an active person in some different academic affairs as well. So, just give me a brief answer in 1 minute. Thank you.
So, as a social science researcher, there is never an answer in 1 minute, that's for sure. So, if you ask a question from a social science researcher, not in 1 minute. However, in short, let's put it that way, that to produce quality paper, you need to have motivation. So, my eccentric motivation was to complete my research paper so that I can get my promotion. Whereas with the passage of time, I also realized that I need to have quality paper because my papers actually are out there and people would judge me based on the quality of my paper. So there is always a compromise between both. So I always keep in my mind that, my promotion is based on the paper, whereas my reputation is based on the quality of paper. And that actually I can bring a decision that I'm going to publish at least 2 papers in a year, and I'll probably work it. So what I do, I make a timetable. So whenever I'm working on a research, I'm just not talking to anybody. I just simply give a break to all other activities, and I'm paying full attention to those papers. Sometimes I give myself 2 to 3 days completely purely working on that. However, I keep prompts. I always keep prompts because sometimes when you are writing, you are highly active, but when you are going to come back on the same thing after a week or so, you would lose what you are writing. So sometimes it's always good to write down rough prompts. These prompts really help you in the later stages.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on behalf of University of Education. Thank you so much, Dr. Irfan, for accepting my invitation and conducting a terrific session regarding the research techniques essential for publishing research in the social science discipline. Thank you for sharing the useful ways to manage time for targeting the quality journal avenues and publishing the technique. Thank you so much, Dr. Irfan.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, audience, for being here with us. And stay tuned for the third webinar on 31st March. Thank you, and Allah Hafiz.